Hello everyone and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez. Today I'll be speaking with a friend of mine from the seafood industry. But before we get into the profile of today's podcast guest, I just would like to thank again Sydney Fish Markets for their support of the podcast and of me to be able to deliver this content to everyone, particularly those with an interest in leadership and leadership development. So today's guest has worked in several different industry sectors, and I'll start with her role, which was an 18-year role with Astrami Seafoods Proprietary Limited as the business manager in that organisation. She then spent a good almost 11 years as the executive officer of the Australian Prawn Farmers Association, and she is currently the aquatic biosecurity liaison officer with Animal Health Australia. Can I welcome to the podcast Helen Jenkins? How are you, Helen?
Good, thanks, Eric. Thank you for having me.
All right, Helen. So look, I'll start where I start with all the podcasts in asking you, in which industry was your first leadership role and why did you take that role on?
Well, I suppose it was with that first one that you mentioned, this Japanese-owned seafood company in Geelong, Victoria. I didn't start out as a leadership role. I started out, I think it's called the Girl Friday at the time. But I transitioned and worked my way up in the industry. So by educating myself, doing accounting courses, a diploma in business management, getting involved with, as I was a director at large with WINSIC, it was WINSIC at the time, and then I was appointed to the Rock Lobster and Giant Crab Fishery Committee through Fisheries Co-Management Council in Victoria, and I was with them for several years as well. So throughout those 18 years, I sort of worked my way up and took on various roles and responsibilities with that company in the industry, in the seafood industry, especially in Victoria.
Excellent. Okay, so you sort of progressed through that organisation into leadership positions. So can I ask, in your experience, Helen, did you find much of a difference, if any, between the leadership and management function?
I don't think you can manage without good leadership, and you've got to lead by example. So you've got to treat all the staff with respect. So I know it's become an overused phrase that we all have a role to play, but be it the cleaner or the maintenance office staff, everyone in the company has a role to play. So, and as a good leader, you recognise that and you treat everyone fairly. So I think the two are sort of hand in hand. So I don't think that one can be done without the other. And I know that I helped to lead that company as well through a restructure. It was a huge restructure. And without the support, I suppose, of management, the ones at the top level, that wouldn't have been possible. I was able to turn it around from $1 million loss to break even within a 12-month period. It involved stacking staff who were not the right fit, sold a lot of excess assets that were come into the company, and just went back to a few old-fashioned things like monthly stock takes, hands-on monthly stock takes and things like that at the time, because that's where the financials went awry.
No, and thank you for sharing that. And that's sometimes come up in the discussions I've had with other guests on the podcast about the differences, or in your case where you're saying the link between the leadership and management function. Can I ask then, in terms of your own leadership, that, and here's a statement and a bit of a question to go with it, leaders sometimes make mistakes. So how do you engage with an error or mistake that's attributed to your leadership, Helen?
Well, I thought hard about what errors or mistakes that I think I might have made over the years, and possibly wasn't until I did the Australian Rural Leadership Program that it made me realise, sort of look at my own self and look at my own style, and it made me realise that I probably could have had more of a voice over those years, been more outspoken, taken ownership of achievements rather than let others take credit to some extent for things that I've done. I don't trust people easily, so it's hard for me to build that trust, and reaching out and asking for help, so I find that difficult. But I'm starting to learn how to deal with these things, know my limitations, and use the strength of others around me in areas that I lack. So that's some of the errors or mistakes. I'm not sure it's an error or mistake, but maybe limitation more so.
That's a good point. I guess it's being able to, and this is something that has come up fairly consistently, is an ability to look at your own capabilities and work on your strengths. As a segue to that previous question, Helen, what's the most difficult part for you about being a leader?
To me, it's being able to have the ability to see what needs to be done or changed, and yet feeling powerless to actually get them changed because it's at such a high level. And things like biosecurity around the seafood. So I feel that seafood is often a sacrificial lamb to other exported commodities. And Australia has to accept inferior seafood, and as we found out through the white spot crisis, Eric, that they can put our fisheries at risk of disease. And I realise that there's no such thing as zero risk, but having responsive IRAs, input risk assessments, would be really, really helpful for things that our role and what we do. Some of the other difficult parts are you often doing your job in isolation and having to deal with issues that others haven't experienced before. Again, like the white spots, so they're for 4 months and you haven't got any relief. And the associations, the industries we work for, they're often running a shoestring budget and they expect a lot from us. So that, again, is a difficult part of being a leader. We have to try to be all things to all people, which we can't. So you have to try and do the best you can. So a lot is expected of you. It's not always appreciated. Can get lonely, and it's a tough gig at times.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I guess those of us that work in that not-for-profit industry body space can very much relate to what you're saying. So let's look at something a bit more positive then. So how then, as a leader, do you measure success, Helen?
I think by knowing that I've left a legacy or a template that others are following or are improving on or placing their own imprint on, knowing that I'm well recognised in the industry, so across Australia, and sometimes it's just for my shoes or my laugh. And I believe that my actions through the white spot crisis and being able to handle the crisis is a huge measure of success. And I think, to me, I try to think of a good leader and who a successful leader was. And the one that I admire most is probably Nelson Mandela. So he kept true to his principles and beliefs, even though it kept him incarcerated and poorly treated for most of his life. So he wouldn't measure his success until many years it took him to have success. So I wouldn't want it to be that long, but I'd like to be remembered in some small way.
Okay, and that's thank you for that response. That brings up the idea about looking for a template that you can use to model your leadership behaviours on. And I've never actually gone down that track, and that's not to say I've got all the answers for leadership myself, but I have heard some people say that's what inspires them to keep moving forward, particularly when you've got a leader in an industry or a part of life that has nothing to do with the work that you're doing. You can take inspiration from what they do. So that's quite an interesting response. So look, the next set of question statements are just to get a feel from you on certain aspects of how you develop leaders. So the first question I've got is, on-the-job experience develops better leaders.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think that you have to be on the job to experience what everyone else is going through to be a better leader. And it's just as good for the boss to be on the shop floor or on the boat or whatever and experience what everyone's going through, the crew or the staff, and just understanding everything that happens. So unless you have that full understanding, you're sitting at the top and you're just looking down all the time, you just never really understand it. So yeah, I think it's imperative that you have to have on-the-job experience to be a good leader and to develop yourself. Does that in your mind, just to unpack that a bit, Helen, does that extend to if you start as a junior in a company and you walk through all the steps to understand what the company does and you get experience in that role, that's a pathway to get good leaders is through that kind of job experience? I think so. If the opportunity is there to take the next climb up the ladder, so to speak, better start. I started in my career, so...
yeah, same. When the opportunities come, you tend to try and give them a go. So as a link to that previous statement, what are your views on formal education?
I think it helps. So I think that education, as I said, can be a helpful tool, but you've got to have that within yourself to be able to do it as well. This is not all about reading things in a book. You have to have the on-the-job experience. And I know from your next one, other leaders born, not made, so I think it can be both. Some leaders are very charismatic and they're easy to follow. So sometimes they're not the right ones to follow, but their charismatic style makes them easy to follow.
Sure. Yeah. So in your experience, Helen, have you found more of that born leader type person or the one that's been made?
No, I'm trying to think about all those ones I've come across in the industry, and I think most of them again, it started at the not lower levels, but come up through the ranks. So they're the ones that I've sort of seen. And they've had that experience behind them. They know all the issues. They know, they understand the politics internally and externally, which is a big thing, especially in this industry. So I don't know, that's sort of what I've seen in the industry, is that they've started and worked their way up.
Look, yeah. Helen, the next set of statements or issues I want to bring up, if it's okay, it's around some of the work that I'm doing in my some postgraduate studies that I'm doing. And I'm not going to ask the following to get your, yes, I fully agree or don't fully agree with what you're doing in your research, but more around the topic areas of strategic thinking and foresight. Now, in the research that I'm doing, it's coming out quite strongly that strategic thinking and foresight in particular are some critical leader capabilities. What's your view on those two capabilities in the context of your leadership experience?
I think you can have all the strategic thinking and foresight capabilities in the world, but the best leaders to me are those who are able to adapt to change, be dynamic rather than static, and be proactive rather than reactive. And then through the Australian Rural Leadership Program course that I did, I was introduced to contextual leadership. And that was an ability to understand an evolving environment and capitalise on those evolving trends. So to me, yeah, and again, you're using the good old white spot as an example, and it's, sometimes not until shit happens that things then start to change. So you don't really have the foresight to have those things, or those needles in strawberries, for example. You had the foresight to think, well, that's going to happen. We need to be prepared for that.
So, yeah, okay. I take your point. Take your point.
I think you have to have the ability to be adaptable.
Yeah, okay, and that's and thank you again for sharing that, and that has come out as well in some of the podcasts that I've done. That this idea that being a change agent and being able to deal with change, and I guess the ambiguity that comes with that is a critical capability. And again, this is why I'm doing these podcasts, is trying to get people's different perspectives on what are those key critical leadership capabilities. And before I forget, for the benefit of the listeners, I've put out a short survey on this, trying to get some more insights from leaders across Australia around what they see are some of the key leadership capabilities and issues around leadership development. So keep an eye on that, particularly on LinkedIn. If you're a LinkedIn junkie, it would only take you 5 minutes of your time to fill out. So Helen, before we go, and here's the final question as part of the podcast, what might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
So I would say, trust in your ability. Don't be afraid to grasp opportunities. Speak your mind truthfully and diplomatically. Never waver from what you believe in, and have the courage to seek change and challenges. Always stay positive, be prepared for knocks, but keep going. Be strategic, there's the old strategic thing again. Build relationships, because there's nothing like having a good network around you. Take risks, and be brave and be courageous. And have confidence in your ability. Be determined to achieve things and have an understanding of the people around you and the issues. Know when it's time to change or move. So I remember hearing a prominent leader in our industry once say, it's no good flogging a dead horse, meaning don't keep going if it's not going to work.
Sure. Okay. No, thank you for that. And look, you have mentioned the ARLP, or the Australian Rural Leadership Program. What I'll do for the benefit of the listeners is put a link to that site so they can go have a look of what that program is about, because I know particularly people in our industry sector that is the commercial fisheries, be that aquaculture or wild harvest fisheries, have undertaken that course as a way to develop their skill set. Yeah, I think what you were saying before about the contextual leadership is something to think about and add to that suite of knowledge around what makes good leaders, and how you, particularly when you mentioned before about being introspective, or being able to unpack the good and the bad things about your own leadership that can be addressed, it can be a bit confronting, or tend to want to hear good things about themselves and not necessarily those things that might not be so good. And I think we all sort of fall into that trap. So, look, Helen, I appreciate your time. Thank you for participating. I know it's this year's going to be another big year for all of us in industry, and I know that in the biosecurity space, you and the organisation you're working with, which is Animal Health Australia, will be particularly busy like any other year around biosecurity risks. So I wish you all the best for 2020.
Thank you, and same to you, and all the listeners out there. And I must say that it's good now to see so many women in the industry in leadership roles, and I've certainly had a fabulous 31 years in the industry, in the seafood industry. So
thank you for your time, Helen. So for those listening, I've been speaking on the leadership topic with Helen Jenkins. Thank you again, Helen.
Thanks, Eric.
And thanks everyone for listening, and I will catch you all on the next podcast.